It's May 15, 2009, and we're at the home of Loren Brand in Leadington, Michigan, doing a Veterans History Project interview under the auspices of the Library of Congress. Loren Brand was born November 23, 1943 at Niles, Michigan. And we're currently doing the interview at his home at 322 North William Street, Ludington, Michigan. I am the interviewer / camera operator, Wallace Erickson. I served with Loren in the, not in the Marine Corps, but in the FBI for a number of years. And so that is our common link, both Marine Corps and the FBI. We are doing this interview, again, as part of the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. But we're also doing the interview as under the auspices of the History Department at Grand Valley State University at Allendale, Michigan. Loren was a Marine officer, discharged at the rank of captain, and he was in the aviation end of the Marine Corps. Loren, when and how did you enter the Marine Corps?
Well, I entered the Marine Corps in 1966. I was in college at Michigan State University at the time, and I had initially started college at North Texas State University and had transferred in, I believe it was 1963, and was taking a little, because of the transfer, lost some credits. It took me almost 5 years, well, it did take me 5 years to get my degree at Michigan State University. Well, because I'd taken over 4 years, the draft board, which only gave you an S2 deferment for 4 years, began sending me notifications about the draft, etc. I was in a particularly jeopardizing position on that score because of the fact that I had registered for the draft in Texas. In Texas, at that time, any high school graduate, no matter what their grades were eligible to go to college, and they could find a school somewhere in Texas to go to. Therefore, the draft pool was quite shallow, as you might say, and so many students were taking at least 6 months of college or something, that my number came up quickly when I had completed 4 years of college, that I was now eligible. It happened to be on the day that I really signed my life away, so to speak, was due to the fact that I got notification to take my pre-draft physical, which at that time, there wasn't a lottery going or anything, was pretty much indicative of the fact that you were ripe for drafting, and I had no physical problems that would prevent me from passing that examination. So I knew I was probably due to be drafted even before I graduated. As I pondered that one day and walked back across Michigan State's campus, I cut through the Student Union building, and as the plan for my life must have been, there were all the officer candidate school recruiters for the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Army. And I thought, well, I should check into this. Having had a lot of friends who were interested in aviation throughout our teenage years and all, I thought, gee, it would be nice to fly. So I thought, well, let's check with the Air Force. And the Air Force really told me that that since I wasn't a math or science major, I was a business major, that I probably didn't have enough of the hard sciences in my resume to become a pilot for the Air Force. I then slid sideways to the left, and there was the Navy, and basically the Navy also said about the same thing. I wasn't interested in the Army in as much as they had a warrant officer program, and I thought, if I'm going to do this, I want to be an officer. So I went down another booth, and there was the Marine Corps, and they were quite impressive. I love the uniform, and jokingly, they just about promised me they'd build me an airplane tomorrow if I would sign on the line. But first, I should take the exam. They were not very concerned about my academic pursuits or anything. They figured that would be worked out in the exam. Took the exam and did really quite well on it, and they said, hey, we want you, and to avoid the draft, basically, I said, okay, when I graduate, I'll be ready to go to OCS. Long story short, I basically got assigned to an officer candidate class in October of '66. So I had the summer off after graduation, and I had met the woman who I eventually married, and I'm still married to, and we became engaged, and on October 5th, I believe, I reported in at Quantico, Virginia to the Officer Candidate School. I unfortunately had injured a knee in trying to get physically fit for the OCS, and so had quite the time getting through it with a swollen knee half the time, and having to perform physically, but I was able to get through it, and did quite well in the end, and became a second lieutenant on December 16th of 1966. Incidentally, got married the next day when I got back home to Lansing.
What is your wife's name?
My wife's name is Tamara.
Thank you.
Tamara Brand, and like I say, we've been together now, 43 years. I was then assigned to flight school in Pensacola, Florida, after about a 20-some day leave, and we proceeded down there, found a place to live, and have since visited it, and it's still there. And the landlord talks about all the flight students that rented during the time of the Vietnam conflict. We pretty much rotated through there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, when I got there, the aviation classes were backed up. They were generally about 50 per squadron. You went through primary flight, which was all ground schools and things like that, and then into flying your first aircraft, the T-34 Mentor. So I, as many others did, had to wait almost 3 months, which wasn't a bad thing for a newly married couple. And it was interesting because each class for flight school would be taken out of the previous Friday's graduating class of the Navy Aviation Officer Candidate School, which is held at Pensacola, and then they would add maybe 25 more to the 50 that were Marines. So it was slower to get us in, and they would start the next day. Since there were 75, I recall that that was too big a class for the physical fitness program that they had. And so they said, we will test everyone, running the obstacle course, doing push-ups, set-ups, this type of thing. And they would eliminate those that were in shape. I smile because of the 25 that were allowed to of 25 Marines, 24 of us passed the exam at the top, so only one Marine and the rest were all Navy. None of them passed it, as well as, and we'd been sitting around for 3 months, so we were quite proud of that and had a great laugh. We were able to go down to the golf course every morning when we checked in, and stand around the putting green and putt golf balls and that type of thing. Entered the first stages of flight school, I believe in April or late March. It's a little hard to remember exactly when it was.
Of 67, is that right?
67, yes. And it was preceded by a meeting I will never forget. They had maybe 200 or 300 of us who were going to be entering in the next few weeks, aviation candidates, all second lieutenants or ensigns, come together in a meeting auditorium, and had several people get up and give us little lectures on what to expect in flight school, and how we were expected to perform, etc., etc. But the thing I remember is they, of course, brought in a hero to get us pumped up, and it was a lieutenant commander who flew F-8 Crusaders. He was assigned to a photo recon unit, which would, upon bomb strikes or something in North Vietnam, would make that low fast pass, I should say, photographing the damage for intelligence. Very risky job, very scary. I mean, after all, everyone else had made the enemy mad, and here comes an unarmed man flying through the middle to get the pictures, and we were all quite impressed, and he had a number of medals. His first statement basically was that he wanted to address the Marines in the audience. And our ears picked up, of course. And he said, "I want to tell you right now, gentlemen," he said, that look to your right and look to your left. He said, one of you three is not going to make it through alive, should you get your wings. That was rather sobering. But of course, the Marine Corps had been somewhat preparing us for the dangers of our job mentally all through OCS. That set us back a bit, especially, and then he made the further comment that he didn't have, and excuse the expression, he didn't have the balls to fly helicopters. That's why he flew jets. It made us chuckle somewhat, but it was still a sobering thought. After that, we entered flight school and progressed through all the different classes, and of course some of the students in there had previous flight experience. I recall that one young man had 1,000 hours of crop dusting experience, and we were all quite impressed. However, he wasn't a naval aviator yet, and as I recall, didn't score all that high throughout the training above everyone else.
Beyond the T-34, what other aircraft did you fly in?
Well, there were there were stages in
Okay.
what you did. You flew the T-34, which you soloed. Generally, solo hours were begun around the 12th hour, I would say, is when you made your first landing and takeoff, etc. I did mine in about 9 hours. Never forget the day. You don't expect it, and suddenly you're landing at an outlying field and told to come to a stop, and the next thing you know, there's a tap on your helmet and your instructor's standing on the wing, and he says, "I'll be here, come back and get me." Make 3 or 4 passes and landings and then stop. It was an exhilarating day, followed at the O Club by the tradition in those days. I'm certain it's not today, but in those days you bought your instructor a bottle of his favorite alcoholic libation. My instructor preferred scotch, and he told me what type of scotch also. Don't recall what that was now, but I remember not knowing much about scotch. I had to go hunting for it, and it wasn't cheap. And I later learned through talking to instructors, they had cabinets full of alcohol by the time their tour of flight instructor ended. And I did, and we met at the O Club, presented that, and he gave me congratulations. If I recall right, he was a Lieutenant J.G. Epperly, I think his name was, something like that. And we had a little wedding down party, beer and potato chips. It was really a top drawer type party. And we were, proud of that. Then came all the other training, aerobatics, various maneuvering, different types of training. Once we completed that, which constituted, I don't really recall, I could look at my flight book, but it wasn't a great number of hours. We then moved on to the T-28 Trojan, built by North American. It's an equivalent aircraft to World War II fighters. It had a radial engine, about 1,200 horsepower, so 10-foot prop. It was large. It had a maximum speed around 340 some miles an hour, which was equivalent to the fighters in the early part of World War II. Much more maneuverable than training aircraft of the past. It had more torque, I remember one of the instructors saying, than any of the World War II fighters. On takeoff, when you added the power to it, your leg was just trembling holding the rudder in to be able to keep it straight down the runway. We flew, again, aerobatics in that, all types of formation flying, and we did our instrument flying in that aircraft also as we progressed. During this progression of flight school, we started at the Pensacola main base, then went out to Milton, Florida at that time, which had the Softly field, I believe. No, I'm not sure that was in Milton. No, Milton was for VT3. Softly was for the T-34. When we completed, then we went to Milton, Florida, where VT3 and 2 were. Now VT2 was the standard syllabus flying. Generally, you would complete that stage of fixed wing flying with about 205 hours total with the T-34 and the T-28.
VT, is that like visual training? Is that what it stands for? Or?
You know, I know the T is for training.
There's various stages then.
Yeah, various stages. VT2 is where I would say probably 80 to 90% of the pilots went through. I did quite well in my first stages and was assigned to VT3. There probably were only, I really don't know, I would see no more than maybe 45 or 50 pilots in that, whereas the other stages had maybe 200 or 300. And we were given twice the load, twice as fast. I completed all of that in 10 months, whereas a VT2 pilot would take anywhere from 13 to 14 months. Quite stressful, particularly because my wife was pregnant with our first child and was not doing well during the pregnancy. It all turned out fine, but caused a lot of stress, a lot of problems at home. But we would get up very early in the morning, be over for link hops, maybe 2 link hops in a row in the morning from 6 a.m. till 8. Then we would go to ground school from 8 to noon with such subjects as aviation physiology, power plants, aerodynamics, you name it. An exam almost every day on each one of those subjects. And then in the afternoon we would be scheduled for 2 flights, which you had to be prepared for. And not just prepared, you had to have it down intimately. My wife still recalls, and this is common amongst all the pilots, walking around the room with our arms extended, going through takeoff procedures, flaps down, climbing out, rate of turn, the vectors that you use to get out to the training areas, the speeds, everything, so that it was so honed that the next day, even though it was the first time you might be doing something, you had the steps down perfectly and then executed them. I completed the first stage of that with my final check ride, flown by the squadron commander, who had been squadron commander for 5 years. Highly unusual step to have anyone give you a check ride, other than one of the other basic instructor pilots. And he did so because my grades were so high. He wanted to make sure that that I was what my instructor claimed to be. I scored 17 aboves, that's the highest you can, out of 18 maneuvers on that flight. Never been done before. I could fly the T-28 like it was mine. I don't know why. I just had a very good ability to fly. I'll say this now, although there's a lot more story to come. Why I had the skill that I did, I ended up flying in a squadron on the West Coast after Vietnam that flew the presidential baggage, etc. Guarded the president, things like that, and many of the people in that squadron went on to fly the president in HMX-1, so I think I was kind of headed in that direction when I got out of the Corps. Flying was something that I could really do, but I didn't love it like everyone else did. I liked it, but it wasn't my consuming passion. But it was something I think in my life was probably the thing I was the most qualified for, of anything. We got through flight school in the T-28, and at that stage, your total composite scores from pre-flight, primary flight, advanced flight, all these were taken into account, and a number was given to this. I recall at the time that in our squadron, the Navy pilots were told that with 120, maybe 120 even, 120 some points, they would be eligible for fixed wing attack, which meant the A7,
Intruder?
yeah, not Intruder, Link Vought built it. It was like the Crusader,
Crusader,
but it
yeah.
was a more modern version, smaller for air-to-ground attack, or the A6, or even the F4, and 120 points would do it. I had 183 points, and there was one Marine at that time who had about 184 points or something. The max was 200, and no one ever got the max. But the Marines of ours, 20 some that made it through flight school, about 18 to 20, they only took one pilot for fixed wing. So we had to make another choice. Now there's another volunteer job. Do you want to drop out of flight school, or will you take rotary wing? Well, of course, we all knew this was in our future, and we said we would. Now, Navy pilots at 120 points and above went on to Beeville down in South Texas, down near Galveston, for their jet training. So now that's left us for the helicopter pilots and some Navy and Marines. We began our helicopter training. First aircraft that we trained in was the Bell TH-13M, as I recall it was. It was the classic bubble helicopter that you see on, well, this will be maybe
MASH.
viewed in years from now, MASH, yeah, which is a television show from the 70s. But it's one that anyone who studies helicopters will easily see, because hundreds were made. It was primarily flew in the Korean War, and there was a medevac chopper there. But that was what we trained on. It's a 6-cylinder horizontally opposed Continental engine, which was piston, of course, and so you had a throttle on the collective, and it had no servos or stabilization gear. That was all done with your feet, your hands, and your head, basically. Someone once compared flying those type of helicopters to tapping your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time, plus reciting the Gettysburg Address, because there was so much to do. It was a very skittish aircraft, but you could become quite competent in it. One incident during training that's humorous now, at the time various people got upset about it. I was scheduled for a solo, and I was there on time. I went out, pre-flighted my aircraft, got a ground crewman to stand by for turned up, got a green light from the tower, and you had to air taxi these aircraft, and they were parked in amongst others. But that day was extremely windy. I don't recall what it was, but it was really gusty. There were some storms coming in. Well, I maneuvered it out safely out between all the aircraft, taxied to the runway, and noted that what an unusual day it was that there were so few aircraft on the field. Again, the tower gave me the green light, as there were no radio communications, and I flew out to the training area, which was 10, 15 miles away. Consisted of a very large flat field with various marks on the field that you could hover around and maneuver in different patterns and turn and do all these types of practices, and surrounded by big pine forests. And I'm out there, and there was absolutely no one there.
What field, what airport were you on?
This was out of Ellison Field, which
Ellison.
is on the edge of Pensacola, Florida. I don't know if it still exists even, but it was the helicopter training field.
Okay.
And I was out there, and I certainly was buffeted by the gusts and had to fly this, but I'm doing hovers 5 feet off the ground, and making approach shots to that, and doing squares and different things. And then I completed my syllabus that I needed to train on, and I headed back. Well, I get back to the field, and now I really realize that everything is battened down. All the aircraft are tied down, and there's no one out there except for some ground crew who are frantically waving at me. And I air taxi in through these gusts and everything and put it in its place. And shut down, and was immediately told by a runner, a Navy personnel who came running out of the ready room, that I had to see the commanding officer immediately. Having never been called to the mast before, so to speak, I really didn't know what to expect, and I went in and was immediately kind of yelled at. And I explained I was scheduled for a flight. I had a green light from the tower. I had all the go-aheads that I thought I needed, and I had completed the flight with no mishap. Then I was told that flight operations had been called secured before I took off, but that the tower must not have gotten the information because they had checked, and indeed they had launched me. And that it was extremely dangerous, and that I was very lucky to be home alive, because there was the outskirts of some monsoon activity or whatever coming into the Pensacola area. But it did give me confidence in knowing that I could fly that aircraft in some pretty bad conditions. So all's well that ends well. After that stage of flying, we moved on to the H-34, which was, let's see, that was called, I'm trying to remember exactly, the Sikorsky
With
aircraft.
the radial engine
Yeah,
again. The same engine as in the Trojan, right?
Oh, right,
28?
same,
Yeah.
the
1200
1820, our 1820. And it was still in service in many Marine squadrons at that time, and serving in Vietnam, so it was the frontline helicopter. And we were trained in that, auto rotations, all the same type of thing, instrument flying, everything that you did in advanced flying with the fixed wing aircraft. I did quite well in that and progressed through that quite rapidly. Had one incident on one of my final check rides. I had a man who went on to fly for the United Airlines. In fact, though, I trained him in the CH-46 some years later, a year or two later. But he was quite the demanding flight instructor, and on some of my instrument approaches, at which time you're doing, a flight around the field, but you're making approaches constantly and talking to air traffic control on the ground, and approach control, I should say, not air traffic, but approach, that he would constantly talk during this time and ask you questions and try to divert your attention from all the things you were trying to do in the cockpit. One of the things he did was to put his finger over the pitot tube outside of his window, which effectively cut off all your airspeed information. And you were to go through, and of course you're talking to approach, you're on approach, and you're trying to hold a glide path and respond to all their commands. And at the same time do circuit breaker checks and everything else to make sure you hadn't lost any power to that instrument, although it was primarily powered by the air pressure. But nevertheless, he tried everything, and I recall his one question. In those days, the James Bond series had just really taken off in 1966, and many of us had read the books and things like this. So he begins questioning me about James Bond's CIA sidekick, which just happens to be Felix Leiter, and I remembered that, knew that. Then he asked what type of car did Felix Leiter drive. This was interrupted by my having to respond to air traffic control that I'd crossed the outer marker and was proceeding inbound. And then I responded he drove a 1953 a Studebaker Hawk with a 1953 Cadillac engine. How mundane is that? Then he asked me to, on the next approach, to explain to him the LIFO-FIFO system of inventory accounting. And so I went through that as best I could from business school, and to his satisfaction, I might add. But that was the type of check rides we had. I also did it with a terrible sunburn that I'd gotten the day before laying out on the beach in Pensacola, so that just added to the pain and frustration. But I passed with flying colors, and shortly thereafter was awarded my wings. My wife was flown home to have the child, our first son, Jefferson, partly because of some threat of complications, which never occurred, and the family doctor there wanted to do this. Well, I was left alone. Had my wings ceremony on, I believe, I want to say May 10th of 1968. Then drove home, collected my family, and reported to my first duty, which happened to be in North Carolina at Camp Lejeune. New River was the aviation base, where I was to train in the CH-53, which is the Sea Stallion. It was the A and B model at that time. They're now quite advanced. They have 3 engines now as opposed to the 2, and a lot more electronic gear, but it was a wonderful aircraft, very powerful. I ended up in the CH-53s because while top of my class, my wife wouldn't let me have my first choice, which was helicopter gunships. And she insisted I go to the 53s. It was the heavy haulers, were very expensive aircraft, didn't have quite the danger or potential that all the other choppers did. And after serious discussions about this, which she won, I went to the 53. And that was, like I say, in North Carolina. Trained there as a new pilot with my wings. Became a first lieutenant at New River, and qualified and went through the complete syllabus for training. And then I was scheduled to take leave and then report to Traverse Air Force Base for flight to Vietnam in late September. I think it was September 28th, I believe, of 1968, for transport to Vietnam. I always remember getting on after all the goodbyes. I flew. My last visit at home with my wife was with my mother in Niles, Michigan, and then I flew out of South Bend Municipal Airport to San Francisco to go to Traverse Air Force Base. And I think that's when it really hit me where I was going. I mean, we had been psychologically prepared all through flight school with the dangers of just the inherent dangers of aviation. But now I was to not only to take that on, but there were going to be people trying to interdict my life with gunfire. And it was a scary moment, I have to say. I had probably a lump in my throat for most of that flight to San Francisco. By the time I got out there, while it's still nervous and jittery, I was then joining others in the same situation. While I didn't know all of them, I knew some of them, and we boarded an aircraft. We were flown to Vietnam on a commercial aircraft. I don't know if you were when you flew over.
Flying Tiger.
Flying Tiger. Okay. I think ours was Northwest, but I'm not sure. And it was a long flight, but I don't particularly recall nervousness or anything. There was a lot of chatting. It took 20 some hours to get over there, with a stop in Guam, as I recall. And that was uneventful. We landed in Da Nang, which I think all Marines did. And I recall in my head, and maybe everybody did this because...
Did you go through Okinawa? Did you go there first?
I'm trying to recall. Did I go?
Camp Schwab?
Oh, I must have. We must have landed in Okinawa. Yes, you're right.
For like a week or so or less?
A few days, yeah. To get all our gear. And they took our most of our summer service uniforms.
Right.
Because we wore utilities in flight suits. And so they took our summer service. That feeds into another story later on. And those were left at Okinawa. And we were at Camp Hansen, as I recall.
Camp Hansen, yes.
Camp Hansen. Just a few days, not much to recall about that. Then we boarded a C-130, I believe, or possibly commercial, but I don't recall the aircraft. But I do remember getting to Da Nang and stepping out into that oppressive heat, and in my mind trying to look around to see where I should run to take cover when the rockets hit. Because we had heard these stories from previous officers who had gone over that upon their arrival at various places they had a rocket attack, etc. By the time I arrived in 1968, Da Nang was a very large military presence. The main Da Nang Air Base, I doubt, got rocketed very frequently, if at all, and certainly probably not in the center where we were. But in my mind's eye, I was ready to be attacked from arrival. After all, the enemy must know that I was such a priority target. It was worth it. But there we were, and we were told that we got orders. It was interesting because there are a lot of different services on that aircraft, and here we were Marine officers, and the Air Force airmen. A nice big bus pulled up for them. It was air conditioned, and they get on, and the door is shut, and they're looking nice and cool in there, and they drive off. The Army had a little lesser bus, but it looked pretty nice. It may have been air conditioned, I couldn't tell, but it was a definite transportation bus. The Navy sent what was a gray painted school bus with all the windows down, no matter the fact it was 105 out. They were all in there. And then the Marines came, and they sent us a 6x with benches, and officer and enlisted climbed on board.
It's a 5.5 ton truck.
Right, yeah, and a 5.5 ton truck with no springs, I think, because every rock on the road bounced us, with all our stuff, and we had a considerable amount. I had followed the guidelines on a sheet of paper that was given to us about what we should bring, and brought virtually everything, not realizing that probably most of that stuff would have been abandoned by the guy I was replacing, and I didn't need to bring it. So I had nearly 100 pounds to carry, and I was carrying this. And we went over, and enlisted went to the barracks, and we were given officer transit quarters. We weren't there 45 minutes at the Marine base called Marble Mountain, which was a short takeoff and landing runway designed for helicopters and STOL aircraft. And we were there, checked in, I and a captain and a couple other lieutenants, when there was this tremendous explosion. And we immediately headed to the back door of our Quonset hut. Actually, it was a hooch, which was a tin-roofed constructed building with screens around 4 sides, maybe a partition wall halfway up. It was open to the air, in other words.
Plywood floor,
Plywood
sides.
floor, a couple 3 steps up, elevated off the ground.
Everybody called him a hooch.
Right, we called him a hooch. And we commenced to run to the back door. Well, the bunker was down 2 steps, and immediately the door to the bunker was there. So you really just had to, get out. Well, we went flying out so fast that we kind of stumbled on those first 2 steps, and the captain, I recall, being in the lead, hit his head on the overhead of the bunker and knocked himself cold. Maybe not totally unconscious, but he was certainly laying there, our first wounded. And we pull him inside, and he recovers. He wasn't out or anything, but he recovers there, and a big goose egg on his head. And we find out that Marble Mountain is virtually a large rock or conglomerate of rocks at the end of the runway, which the Vietnamese mined for marble, for religious artifacts and maybe for building, I'm not sure what, but constantly dynamited over there. We hadn't been in country long enough to know the difference between artillery incoming or outgoing or rockets or whatever, and that rocket attacks didn't happen in broad daylight. We didn't know any of that, but that explosion made us think, here it is. And of course there was, we all swore not to tell that story on the captain while he was in our presence anyway. And that was that. The next day we had to, again, the Marine Corps, not trying to spoil us any, told us that the only way for us to get to our duty assignment, which was at Fubai, which was the airport for Hue City, I guess it was 100 miles north, maybe 75 miles north, I'm not really sure now, was we had to go out and find our own ride. Now, the uninitiated might have tried to find a truck convoy or something, and that would have been hours of agony on a bench. But the wiser people amongst us told us that get down to the flight line and kind of hitch a ride. And that's what we did. We found a 46 going north, a CH-46 going north, and we loaded aboard and they flew us up there, and we checked into our squadrons. We checked into our squadrons. I joined HMH 463, which was part of MAG 36 also.
What does HMH stand for? Helicopter?
Helicopter, Marine, Heavy.
Okay.
And it was a squadron made up of many senior officers. I mean, we had several majors. We had two colonels, I believe, at the time, or at least one, and some light colonels. A lot of captains. They had come over together 6 to 8 months before, and had come as a full contingent that had flown together in the States before coming over. And I was there as a replacement pilot. You're given a week to acclimate yourself to the heat and to the chow and this sort of thing, and then I began my flight status. I will never forget my first flight in Vietnam, my first combat operation, and what it was to, the heavy lifters were to fly ammunition to a remote landing zone on the DMZ at night. It was a night hop, one of my first.
Now, Loren, and this was a CH-53 you were in at that point. Okay.
Sea Stallion.
Right. Sea Stallion.
And it was, we were to carry sling loads of 155 artillery rounds to this fire base atop a mountain in the dark at night. I was flying with, and I don't know the man's name, I don't believe I've ever met him again. He was one of the last two flying warrant officers. He wasn't a commissioned officer, but he was a warrant officer, which there was only 2 in the Marine Corps at that time, but he was an expert pilot. And I think that's why they assigned him to me, because he had more hours than just about anyone in that squadron, in all types of aircraft, not only the 53. And I pretty much flew the night. We flew several hours of back and forth hauling ammunition at night to the mountaintop, and the only light that we had to maneuver by was someone on the ground with a flashlight cupped in their hands to spot where they were. And then he did the unthinkable to me at the time, was to tell them that instead of just putting it on their small landing pad on top of this mountain, we would move it to the gun sites. Now I'm flying, and I guess he was trying to test me, because I put pallet loads of 155 rounds next to the guns in the dead of night with nothing but a flashlight on the ground. I take pride in that now, but I can remember coming back from that flight so totally drained I could hardly walk from the flight line back to my living quarters. I really only flew about 25 missions or less, maybe 20 missions, with the 53 Squadron, when I and I believe it was 5 other lieutenants and 1 captain got called into the CO's office. And were told that we were needed elsewhere. That what they wanted to get into the squadron was some more experienced pilots, because the ones in HMH 463 were going to be rotated within 4 months, and they didn't want to have remaining a lot of inexperienced pilots. So our 5 spots were being taken by some majors who had been flying 46s down in Da Nang. We initially didn't know anything about the rotation problem of the CO. We weren't involved in that. We thought it was that some of the senior officers were getting tired of getting shot at and wanted a safer job, and so bumped us out of our spots. Of the 6 of us, I recall years ago finding out or thinking that I know 2 of these men got killed, at least 2, maybe 3. 1 was wounded, and I and a Captain Finance who had gone to Huey's came out okay. We'd been told this was good for our career, getting experience in the CH-46, but I don't know that it was too good for some of the guys that didn't make it home. That was always kind of a bitter pill at the time. I found out at a reunion many years later that the CO had always felt bad about that too, and explained it to me. Now when I got moved over to the 46 Squadron, I had not been in country more than a month.
That was a helicopter medium marine?
Yes.
Squadron? What squadron number was that?
265,
265.
HM 265. There was, at Fubai at that time, there was 1 CH-46 squadron, 1 CH-53 squadron, and 1 Huey squadron. So there was only 3 squadrons there. The bulk of the Marine squadrons were either down at Marble Mountain near Da Nang or up at Dong Ha. There was like 3 46 squadrons up there. So we were halfway in between, and were assigned to support north or south. So anyway, I get to the 46s as a result of their need for personnel, because they had taken quite a few losses during the summer months. I had been preceded into Vietnam by a matter of maybe 3 weeks by one of my best friends that I had made in the military. His name was William Hale, middle initial T, I think stood for Tom. We called him Willie T. A great young man from Big Springs, Texas. It's a soft point for all of us that knew him, because Willie T was the guy that was our pep squad, so to speak. He was the only bachelor amongst us, of the 5 or 6 of us that were close friends. Our wives were all close friends, and they were always trying to find a woman for Willie to marry. He was just a good-looking young man who, his forte might not have been flying, I don't know. He took a long time to get through flight school, but he was always up. When we were faced with the stresses of this job, and you have to remember, flight school, many people washed out, and of course then many more at various other stations. It was tough to become a pilot. He was the one to always pat us on the back saying, yeah, we got it made, we're going to make it, we're going to make it, we're the best. And we believed him. I had seen Bill Hale the summer, well, not summer, but let's say 2 months before he went to Vietnam, maybe a month. I think it was a month. I'd flown out to California from my training in New River for a class, for actually 2-3 weeks of classes on the CH-53, and had met him, and he had walked out. We walked on the flight line. I had never sat in a 46. I'd seen him, of course, and but we went out, and that's what he was going to fly in Vietnam, and so we're out there. And for the first time in my knowing him, he was despondent. He was down. The 46 at that time, primarily late 67, early 68, the tail end had been falling off in flight. They diagnosed it as stress related from the, how long they'd been. They came over in early 67.
And this is a twin rotor.
Twin rotor.
Helo, right?
Yeah. built by Boeing Vertol,
Right.
similar to the Chinook, which the Army still flies, and Marine Corps still flies the 46 at this time. But they've been improved and improved over the years. These were A models. And the tail end had, in fact, one of our friends from flight school had the back end just separate in midair. Of course, everybody dies, and there's no parachutes in helicopters. And he said, "It's going to kill me, Brand. It's going to kill me." And you know, not being the pep squad, he was supposed to be my pump. I said, "Bill, it's not either." He says, "Oh man," he says, "they're falling apart over there. You can't see up very well. It's directly above you." And he said, "The losses are pretty big." I said, "Yeah, I know. I know they are. And but it'll be fine. Remember what they always tell us. He said, that flying in combat is 10%, 90% boredom and 10% stark terror." And he said, "Well, we'll get through that 90% and the 10%. We'll be fine." Well, he was, really distraught about this, I could tell. And he went over. Well, I was being sent to HMM 265 to replace Bill Hale, who had been killed. Barely 2 months in country maybe. He was climbing out of a hot zone, and when you do this, there's other aircraft. There's the gunships protecting you. There's your wingmen circling above. There's other aircraft trying to come into the same flight area. It's quite a ballet during combat. You might have 6 people. Replacing him in the 46. I'm sorry for the interruption. And when I check in, it was an ominous thing for me because when you have Marine Corps property, as you know, and you check that back into your squadron when you leave it. You take your helmet, your flight suits, all that, but there is other pieces of property. For example, your bedding, this type of thing is Marine Corps property. Well, I check into 265, and what do I receive? I receive Bill Hale's bed, Bill Hale's sheets, pillowcases, blankets, Bill Hale's locker, his helmet, much of his Marine Corps gear. His personal effects, of course, had been shipped home, but it didn't seem like a good omen, and I had never flown the 46. And here I'm over there, and I was a very religious person at that time. I still am. I'm very religious now, but different religion. But at the time, whenever I had opportunities during the day, I was praying for my safety. A little self-centered maybe, but that's what I was doing. And because people were getting shot down every day, and I'd lost a number of friends already in other squadrons. And to lose Bill was very big to all of us, but me, I'm living with it daily because it's all marked Bill Hale. And they began giving me maintenance hops to learn how to fly. A maintenance hop is when they've repaired a helicopter, tracked the blades, repaired an engine that's not working right, maybe one of the hydraulic systems or whatever. You had to fly it for a little bit of time, and that was the time that they gave me stick time, basically, to learn how to fly, land, take off, etc. Not a real syllabus. We did, when chances gave us opportunity, we would do certain things that shoot touch and goes. I only got to practice auto rotation a 3 times. And these maintenance hops didn't allow you to have, we didn't have any facilities to, like actual landing pad or zones to practice it safely or this type of thing. We had to shoot them to the field. There was some restriction to that.
So that basically was your checkout then in the 46.
Right, how to fly it, yeah. And of course it's
go.
totally different aircraft. One's Sikorsky, one's, Boeing Vertol. Very different everything about them. So, I'm given less than 50 hours of maintenance hops, and I'm assigned to combat. My first combat flight, and again, things stick out. There are certain things that just stick out, and you'll never forget them, is with a major in the squadron. He wasn't the XO, forget what his duties were, but, and I won't give his name because of the story I'm about to tell. The major has me pre-flight the aircraft, and I go out with the crew chief, and we climb all over it, and it's ready to go. And out he comes, and he's carrying all, you know, our charts and everything like we do, a helmet bag, extra weapon, this type of thing. But he's also carrying another couple bullet bouncers, which were ceramic plates that fit in a vest like, to prevent, you know, and he's got extras. And he commences to put one to set on, and he puts one down on the floor and all this stuff. And I had not seen that before. And he pulls the side flap of the seat forward, which cuts off some of your side vision, but it's armored. And he basically straps in and says, "Let's go." He was nervous, he was shaking, and I thought, what's going on? And it was basically, as far as I knew at that point, so we were to fly south to the area below Da Nang. Large operations were going on down there. It was, I believed, we were to go get orders probably from what they called the DASC. It was a radio center that vectored helicopters to various needs, you know, and if there's a resupply mission, they would get it there, and they would look at their resources and assign it to who was available. So as you came into their area, you would call them and say that you were ready for assignment. And as I recall, that's indeed what it was. We did resupply that day, but we were a flight of two, and we have a wingman because he's a major. He's flying the lead ship, but he's not flying the lead ship. I am. And I'm doing all the radio calls, and you know, he's handing me the frequencies because I hadn't built up my own frequency book and all that stuff. But he's not giving any commands. I virtually, on my first combat tour, I wasn't in command because he ultimately was, but since he didn't do any talking or flying or anything, I guess, you know, I pretty much called the shots. And into combat we went. Now, when you fly helicopters, the common belief is that sometime during that day, if not every time you come into a resupply zone, someone somewhere takes a shot at you. You generally don't know about it because it's a rifleman, a single individual or something, but they wouldn't be a combat base or a forward combat base if there was an enemy around, basically. And generally they were surrounded. I mean, they were out there with a LZ somewhere, and
Basically an island.
an island, yeah, that's a good way to put it. So you got shot at every day, we figured, and I had not experienced that. But of course, we didn't get hit that day or anything, but it was a long, tedious day, and he was scared the whole time. You could tell by the look on his face and the fact he hid behind the armor every time we came into a zone, and it was just kind of scary, you know, for my first hop. Life went on, and we proceeded. We had another big loss. A whole crew went down on a strike a few weeks later. His last name was Emerson, and there were a few other, the crew chief, gunner, both pilot, co-pilot, shot down. Their hydraulics were shot out. And in a 46, when the hydraulics go out, you have no control whatsoever of the rotor at all. Huey has direct linkage.
Some mechanical linkage.
But they have servers to make it easier. But you have a mechanical linkage that you can overcome. And then while it makes flying look rather sloppy and you may not have a beautiful landing, you'll be able to get it down.
Walk away.
Walk away. The 46, when the hydraulics went out, the stick takes 3,000 pounds of pressure to move it. And of course, it just bend a pretzel at 3,000 pounds.
So you can't auto-rotate in a
No,
46 at all?
not when the servos go. When everything goes like that, you as we always said, assume the flying dynamics of a free-falling safe. So it wasn't a good deal. And their hydraulics locked up, and they did a slow roll in front of everybody and went in. I mean, it was very tragic. So I commenced to gain, airtime, and I only add this as maybe this isn't really about the flying. It's more about my religious attitude.
It's fine, yeah.
And I put this in for those of you who are believers, such as I am. They always say, and I've thought about this a lot, and I've talked to people about this. They always say there are no atheists in the foxhole. You've all heard that. Well, we were losing people and crew, and there's crashes and there was injuries. One of my friends at 1,500 feet took a small round through the floor and up through his leg. I mean, you're generally at 1,500 feet, you're safe, except for heavy machine gun or something. So there were people getting hurt a lot, and I was praying every day for my safety, and yet I was constantly scared, but I was flying well. It's funny, when you get busy, you can shut it, sort of like playing football. Once the game starts, the whistle blows, you do your job. But this and the off time was worse than the flying time, waiting for some of these things. And so I just got angry. I got angry with God. Oh, why am I guess I was thinking I could just, fly through combat without any fear. I'd have been crazy, I guess. I didn't think of it that way, though. I just kept saying, oh, it's not helping, it's not helping. But here I was, alive and well. I should have thought of that. But I cut it off, and I said, I'm just going to devote I'm dead man. I mean, many of us are. And I'm just going to do the best I can. Well, I made flight leader. I was talking about my religious feelings at the time, and I was mentioning that I'd become quite despondent about being protected by my prayers. And I had decided that God wasn't there for me. There were too many people, as we use the expression, buying the farm. And I committed myself to just flying the best I could. Well, I had not had all the, stateside training on the helicopter, the schools, all the other stuff. But I began flying that aircraft as best I could. I made aircraft commander by probably end of November, early December, just a couple months after I transitioned to it. I made flight commander, that's 2 aircraft, by January, and by late February I was a division commander. I was ahead of my cohorts who had trained in nothing but the 46. So things were going okay for me. The combat was quite heavy. There are many instances that happened over there that stick out in my mind. I don't want to go on and on about these, but I had a couple crew chiefs wounded. On one occasion, when I was flying with a senior aircraft commander, I had made aircraft commander, but I was flying co-pilot that day. I've told you about this before. We were inserting troops into some pretty hot action, and the landings were very fast and very quick on the ground and get out of there. Unlike the Army, and if you've listened to Army helicopter pilots, they often came in mass. Maybe 20 helicopters sometimes, maybe more. They used to, if they had large enough landing zones, fields and stuff, they would come in all together. And the Marine Corps, with much less resources, we had to use ours different. And so what we would do is generally, even with a flight of 4, the first aircraft, the lead plane, would get the call from the ground to pop the smoke, and they would pop a smoke. You would identify it, but not by the color. If they popped a yellow smoke, you'd say, I got your banana. If you popped a red smoke, got rose is my color, or something like that. What that was for is because the enemy monitored radio frequencies, and it was not uncommon if you said, I have your yellow smoke, that you'd have 4 yellow smokes down there. 3 of them are enemy positions, and you'd be flying right into a machine gun nest or something. So you would go down, and as soon as you dropped your troops, you'd call, coming out hard, right. You're going to make right spirals, or left, depending. You were trying to stay away from what you thought to be the most dangerous areas, the gunfire from one side to the other. So you'd say, coming out hard left. You'd take off and immediately just pour power and make a hard left bank spiral up. You didn't want to stay far, you wanted to stay as much over the zone as you could, because that's where your suppression fire was being given to you. And your own gunners, of course. We had 250 caliber machine guns on there. And we would spiral up. Well, at the same time you were coming up, the next aircraft, or your wingman, began to do a spiral down. I can remember on hard pull spirals up, seeing the shadows of blades flashing in the cockpit from your wingman coming by you going down. And at the same airspace, hopefully, are your gunships making runs down to suppress fire. So there's a lot of aircraft all zooming around in one area, which always makes me kind of chuckle when I hear reports of airliners nearly colliding, coming within a half a mile of one another at different altitudes, and that everybody's all upset about this. Here we were operating large, powerful aircraft in a column above an average size field. And it got very congested, and of course all the shouting on the radio from the ground, from the gunships rolling in making their fire runs, from you calling your signals to your aircraft, and you had to separate all of that in your mind to keep clear of what's going on. And so on one occasion, on one of these strikes, we're on final, and my aircraft commander, is flying the aircraft. But he had been flying for maybe an hour, and this was our second or third roll into that hot zone. And we're on final, and it had to be somewhere under 100 feet to maybe 50 feet above landing. We're already transitioning to a nose-up attitude, and he says, you've got it. And I grab the stick. Now you do that automatically. Your whole purpose there is if one pilot gets dinged, the other one has to be ready to instantly be flying the aircraft. So instinctively, I'm on it, requiring me to lift my feet off the floor and onto the yaw pedals. They're not rudder pedals; they're yaw pedals.
Okay.
And the pilot to consequently let go of the stick, the collective, and take his feet off. My main mounts had touched, and my nose wheel is coming down to the ground when it must have gone into a hole. It might have been one of the spider holes that the enemy often used to hide in and pop up in the midst of attacks and things. I don't know, but there was a hole, and I went in it and instantly brought the nose back up. And at that time, as my nose is coming up, a round comes through the cockpit, and it went right in front of the legs of my commander from his side. Had his feet been on the pedals, it probably would have gone through both calves. It didn't. It went in front, hit the radio console, and blew a big hole in it. Just opened it like a watermelon. And I felt this immediate sting on my legs, but most of the blast went beneath my calves. And I felt this sting, and I thought, I'm hit. We used to carry our maps and other paper documents or something like radio frequencies and all in the original Ziploc. Today we use them in kitchens for preserving food and things, but the Navy, or the military I should say, had designed the Ziploc to hold things waterproof, and they were heavy duty plastic, very inflexible, but they pressed together in the seams just like a Ziploc. And I kept maps in there, and when that radio console exploded, something stung my leg, was the fragments and maybe some of the bullet fragments hitting that hard plastic stung my leg like crazy, but didn't penetrate. I didn't get a Purple Heart the easy way, you know. But I thought when the first hit, it was like somebody just slapping you with a ruler on bare skin or something. It just really stung. But I was okay. And at that same time, I tried to, you know, make my only personal shot in the whole war. It was with a .38 pistol that was in my shoulder holster, and I tried to fire out the window of my pilot at what was a Vietnamese who had popped up out of one of these holes in the grass, even though there were Marines all around the area. He had popped up and fired one round, probably from an SKS, you know, certainly not a fully automatic weapon, because only one round hit us. And what happened with that, I don't know. Today I'm an expert with a pistol. At that time I was, you know, I had learned how to shoot it. That was about it. I never saw what happened. We immediately, the troops
At least
were
you
up.
did what you could.
We did what I could. I did what I could, and we got out of there and zoomed off, you know, and what happened, I don't know.
Did you lose your radios?
No.
They still worked.
Yeah, and come to think of it, that's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, the radio still worked. You know, that's something I had forgotten. That certainly they still worked. It must have, you know. But we flew out of there. There were other occasions like that. It was a funny thing flying a helicopter. Things happened when you least expected it. Like many aircraft had landed before us and afterwards at that same location, and no one else had somebody brave enough to pop up in the middle of all that and take a shot, but they did. Another occasion, we were called to back up another flight of 2. There was a flight of 4 from another squadron, and they had Deltas, 46 Deltas, bigger engines, better blades, more powerful aircraft. We still flew the Alpha model, which was weaker engines and everything. Our load capacity was much lower, and when we were loaded equally, they just climbed out faster. So we're called, at the end of the day, we were about to head back up to Phu Bai from down in what's called it was out by An Hoa, to support an immediate insertion. A company, or more than a company, it turned into a battalion fight, had come in heavy contact with NVA down there, which was the actual North Vietnamese Army, and the fighting was building. And as we joined over there, there was already a flight of 2 flights of 4 moving a mass of Marines from one area over to where the fight was, probably a 10-minute flight apart. And they were working, we were to join with 2 Deltas from another squadron and bring out some more. And dusk is starting to fall and everything, and we all come into this zone on a little road, I'll never forget, like a 2-track farm lane, winding through low-level trees and brush. It wasn't typical Vietnamese territory. It just looked different, you know. Could have been in northern Michigan somewhere, you know, way out. But anyway, the Marines were on either side of this road. They'd set up a perimeter when they'd been told that they were going to be pulled out, and they were holding that perimeter as they were being pulled out. And we had landed, taken a load, and zoomed out, and presumably somebody else came in. There was quite a few to be moved. And it turns out we're the last load to come out. And so the 4 landed on that road, and again, the troops loaded onto the Deltas, and they immediately left us. They lifted and just pulled out of there. And there sat our 2.
You had 2 CH-46 Deltas in the group. You were in an Alpha.
Yeah, there was 2 of us
the
in the
underpowered
Alpha.
aircraft.
And the other Alpha had loaded Marines too. It seemed though that ours was the one selected by the last remaining perimeter people, and they were backing in, and there were some firefights started. We're not sure where the rounds were coming from, but we were waiting for these troops, and of course counting the seconds, because we suddenly realized we're the last ones here, and they were in contact now. And so they get on board, and there's some minimal fire. Nothing seems to be really striking the aircraft, however. But we knew we had to get out of there quick because they were probably closing in. So we lift up, and I'm loaded. I mean, I had everything. Well, I didn't hit, but I tipped that over, and I knew that as soon as I lifted, when you're 100 feet off the ground, you're visible from a half mile away. When you're on the ground, it's just those that are within proximity, and of course trees and obstruct their view. As soon as you pop above the tree line, you become a target for hundreds. And so I wanted to pop up fast, but I didn't have the power that the Deltas did. So I remember making a run for about a half a mile down this road, and it was curvy. And I'm weaving right down the center, and there's trees on both sides. And I jerked that up, all the power I had built from forward speed and everything. And I pulled the collective and climbed as fast as I could, and we popped up, and you'd look at the ground, and it was winking. It was like Christmas twinkle lights, and that was all firearms shooting at you. Fortunately, they were not great shots, and we got out of there. But those are the unexpected things, and we worked both in the flatlands, and we also worked up on the DMZ. And so as the year progressed, as the weather changed, got cooler in the monsoon time. Of course, that meant for cloudier weather and more dangerous flying from weather-related things. But it was cooler, so we could fly to the altitude of the mountain fire bases and things up north. And as the year progressed, you went between supporting those in the south of the I-Corps to those up on the Z. And there was one incident. I'm telling you, I've got so many, I don't know how many you want to hear. These stories just pop up in my mind.
Well, let's hear them, Loren.
Okay.
It's the one time to do it.
That's true, and I don't know that I've ever told them all in a sequence, that's for sure. And now the sequence is getting a little rough because a lot of this blends together, during this time. For example, during the TET of '69, I was told I was going to be trained as an embarkation officer, which meant a month in Okinawa. Not a desirable job. The embarkation officer is one who you own everything in the squadron practically. I mean, every pencil, typewriter, wrench, bolt, spare part, you have to account for, and you have to move it when the squadron moves. Basically, if the CO of a squadron is told his squadron's moving to something, like we went out on board the ship, the CO and his officers fly out to the ship, and they set up their shops and their offices, but the embarkation officer is left with moving virtually everything. And so you had to learn it. It's an accounting program, basically.
Right.
Only you're working with boxes and stuff instead of money. And I was told that if my wife wanted to join me in Okinawa, she could. And I said, where would she stay? And they said, well, there's an unwritten rule. And in other words, you're breaking the Marine Corps rules, that she could stay in the BOQ. They'll make provisions for you. Well, I had little, in those days, very little communication. I mean, you had to go to a radio and stand in line for an hour to get 15 minutes or whatever. And I was able to get a message to her that I was going to Okinawa, and could she get there and get a passport? Well, being the organized lady that she is, she got our state representative that covers Lansing on the job. They got her a passport in no time at all. And she was able to fly to Okinawa via Japan, which is a story she could tell sometime, and join me. And here she was the only wife on the whole base of Camp Hansen, except for the base commander or somebody, a full bird colonel. His wife was there. And so there were only two ladies in all these, and of course I would go to school all day. I would get out at lunch or at the end of the day for dinner, and I would go to the O Club to meet her, which was just up from the BOQ, And there she would be seated at a table of 25. She'd be at the head of the table. There'd be majors and lieutenant colonels and all this, all whining and dining her with a seat left for me next to her up at the head of the table.
For the young lowly first lieutenant.
For the lowly first lieutenant, who learned quickly that you took your seat and kept your mouth shut while they talked to your wife. But most of them had been either in country for 13 months and were rotating home, and they had not talked to an American woman or what was going on or how they should talk to their wife. I mean, it was like a Dear Abby for them asking questions about, well, what would you feel if I did this or this, say, you know. And it was funny because, and she did the best she could. It was kind of heartwarming in a lot of ways. But we did that for 30 days, and then I went back in country. So I got a break there, and I hadn't had my R&R yet, so that was nice. And got back. Tet of 69 was nothing like Tet of 68. That was the Battle of Hue, and HMM 265 had been deeply involved in that, and Quezon, flying into Quezon. We lost crews and ships and everything. So 69, even though I was gone, and there was action, and we had some aircraft shot down. We didn't have any killed. We had some wounded, but nothing, you know. So I get back, aircraft commander, and we're still flying out of Fubai. One incident I'll never forget is I had an emergency medevac on the DMZ, and we're flying in there, and the only place to land that day was where bomb craters had hit. And there was one, and of course there's very tall trees, and up in the northern part up there, trees ran 150 feet. You know, they were very tall. Some forested areas were 200 feet above ground. So if there was a hole, you were just like virtually a hole in the canopy, and you'd have to go down in these holes. And I'm going into this hole, and the ground troops had an individual on every unit trained to help guide in helicopters. Well, an experienced combat helicopter pilot has one person that's trained to get you in there, and that's your crew chief. That 18, 19, maybe 20-year-old, anywhere from corporal to sergeant, was your most knowledgeable man ever. He was the airman of the year, basically, because he could tell, and he knew how you flew. And he knew whether you could get it in or not. And he knew what to watch for, because unlike the Huey, whose blades can take quite a beating from brush and trees and still be flyable, the 46, whose blades intermesh, only needed to have the jolt of maybe a 1-inch branch to knock them out of sequence, and they'll all disintegrate at you, and you become a burning ball of fire. And we had to go down in this, and here's one of the ground troops directing me in. Of course, I'm not taking his directions. I'm listening to my crew chief, but he certainly thinks he's doing it. And it's such a deep crater that all I really could get down was my main mounts on the edge, keeping my blades above the hole. My front blades were what were the concern, and this trooper had gotten down in the hole about 5 feet down from the edge of the lip. It was a good 20-foot deep hole. And I'm having to fly the front part of the aircraft. I can't get the nose wheel down. Now the blades are 3 feet above his head because he didn't move, and his eyes had gotten this big. He was frozen in fear, as well he should have been, but why he didn't just slide down, we'll never know. He's frozen there. I'm having to now hold my blades above his head, because if I twitch, they'll dip 3 foot. And once we had loaded on, we dropped a little more from the weight. Now I know when I have to pull up, and this kid is still frozen there. Everyone expected him to move when I came down.
He's getting all the prop washing.
Oh,
too, right?
blown away. His helmet was off. He's and he doesn't. All he had to do is slide on his butt down dirt farther in that hole, and it had been fine. But he was frozen. So now we're in a predicament. You know, I'd been listening to the crew chief. I've been watching when you do a hover, you watch your instruments, you watch down to the ground, and you watch forward. Well, he's only 1/3 of my checks. And when I'm watching, you know, the various things I've got to watch, he doesn't move like he's expected to. And so there we sat. Now I'm ready to pull. And I have to figure that if I pull too quickly, I'll get bigger dip on that blade and he'll be seriously killed. He won't. You know, and I'm scared. He's scared. My co-pilot is just, oh my God, you know. So, because he was a pretty junior officer. So I ease up that collective like I was trying to land a butterfly on a you know, a tulip, you know, just really easy. And it dips a little bit, but it doesn't get him. And we lift out of there. And I always remember that, not because there was threat, well, there was threat to me just because if something had happened, it might have, you know, but anyway, that kid, you know, I always wonder, you know, we'll never know.
Did he ever realize the danger?
Did he ever realize? His eyes certainly looked like it, and he was frozen. But did he really? Once, but I was blessed all through this time. Things would happen, like almost landed one time and start. You know, my nose wheel is on the ground, but my main gear probably 5 or 6 feet off the ground because it was on a slope, and they'd called it into that spot. Very difficult terrain. And they call us on the radio and say, we're you know, there could be mines down there. It was an old fire base. And I said, there was, right where my nose wheel was set, there was like a footpath up to a more level area, but there were trees. Couldn't have come in from the top so easily. You'd had to come in from, it was a difficult spot. I never did this, and no one ever trained me to do this. I drove the nose wheel up that path. And that, you know, that kept me in the right position.
Right.
Because there was wind blowing, and you're on a mountaintop, and there could be gusts. So if you had lifted into a hover, you might have blown one way or another slightly, and that could have been disastrous. So I drove the nose wheel up into that spot, did our job, but now we had to figure out how to get out. And unfortunately, I was able to resolve that too. But it was during those missions you saw the difference between the Marines flying and Army flying. And the Army saved me on 2 or 3 occasions, so I owe them a lot. And they were wonderful, what we call stickmen or pilots, guys who could really control. But they were warrant officers, and they were 18, 19 years old, 20 years old maybe at the most. Some were older, of course. But they had guts. But they had a rule of flying that we thought was crazy. Having come out of the same hot zones on the Z, taking fire and all, and we would go into them by maybe doing our spiral down over the valley and then popping up onto the top of the ridge line for a few seconds, get people on, off, or drop what you needed, and then pretty much just dive and fall
down
back into the valley. These guys flew like they were landing at, Detroit Metropolitan. They had set up a 1 mile approach and right in straight. And I'll tell you, you just knew over in those hills, those 57 millimeter, machine guns were licking their sights and getting ready. And they would stitch them. And we always wondered why. But that was the way they were told to do it. And, like I say, they saved me. And, Anyway, those were the flights that we did during that time. Then, along about June of '69, we moved from Fubai to the Navy ship, the Iwo Jima, which was a landing platform helicopter, LPH, which is a small carrier, basically, flat carrier deck. They're just shorter, and they have a round bottom for more stability. I mean, wider profile. They're not built for speed, And that's what we flew off of. And so living conditions got much better. Flying hours kind of went down because you didn't have to spend so long getting somewhere. You generally flew in support of things near the beach or whatever. But we still had additional duties and all that took on more danger. From there, we were often assigned what's called Bald Eagle. And Bald Eagle is every helicopter pilot's nightmare, because it was night medevac from hot zones. You would only be called in if there was urgent, immediate, recovery of somebody that had been seriously wounded. And generally, if they were seriously wounded, that meant there was a firefight going on at that spot. So they would launch you from sea, 5 miles out, 10 miles out, and you'd fly out over the countryside of Vietnam. Well, Vietnam at night is not like any other country at night. There are no electric lights anywhere. It's like flying into an inkwell with a bag over your head. It's just so dark.
There's really no horizon.
No horizon, no nothing. I mean, if there's stars out, that gives you some idea, but that wasn't always true either. And you would fly out, and of course you would fly with no lights on the aircraft either. So if you were a flight of 2, all you had was one white light at the rear of your aircraft, a formation light. The trick is never to look at it very long, because if you've ever sat in a black room, you could tack a pen light to the wall. If you stare at that while in that dark room, it'll run all over. It's your eye muscles moving, and it makes it look like it's moving. And if you were flying an aircraft and watching that light and you start seeing it move, you try to correct and you'll fly right into your wingman. So you fly out at night, you call the zone, get them up, they hear you, they can't see you, you can't see them. And when they think you're about overhead, they'll get down in a foxhole and light up a flashlight. Well, from 2,000 feet, a flashlight is like a searchlight. I mean, the ground can't see it because you're down in a foxhole, and they could maybe see a glow, but it'd be really tough even at night for, with the brush and all. But you can see it. So now you have a reference. They tell you where the fire is generally coming from, the north, the south, how far, this type of thing. So you have some idea what you're going into, and you start down. But the problem is when you get to about 200 feet, you gotta have light. There's trees that tall. So you gotta flip on that chin light. And as today, they had rocket-propelled grenades all over the place. And you flip that light on, and suddenly, of course, the guys, your friendlies, start shooting outbound, if they're any good. And they usually always did. Suppression fire. And the tracers are going out, and occasionally a sparkler comes flying at you, and tracers are coming in, and it's just a real bad situation. And it's slower to get to the ground because you really can't see that well, and you're still trying to pick out how to land and what, and so you're very vulnerable as you hang in the air, and you're the only thing of interest happening there. and so we always detested it. But the worst part about it was, again, the wait. Sitting there, sometimes all night you wouldn't get called, and you just praise the Lord, but sometimes you were, and it was just waiting for that moment that was the worst part about it. So we flew off the Ewo, had some nice trips to Subic Bay, because in those days the Navy found it impossible to fight more than 60 days at a time. That's what we always said. They'd have to go back to Subic to replenish the food supplies and stuff. And we got to take part of the squadron, and that was fun. I got to visit the famous QB Point Oak Club with the tailhook bar down below, which is now part of the Naval Museum in Pensacola. Had a great time, wonderful memories, and then we were back in action. I had come back from one of those things, either that or survival school in the Philippines. We had to go through jungle survival. And one of those, I got back, and one of our, what we call hooch mates in our Quonset hut, a guy named John Prombo, had joined the squadron a few months before, and he was in my particular hooch. Nice man, really good guy. He was an experienced pilot, calm, and we all liked him. He was getting short on his tour, 13-month tour for Marines, and he had saved his R&R till the very end because he and his bride-to-be were to be married. He was going to do it when he only had 30 days left or so. Your last 30 days, generally, you were kind of scaled back, unless they absolutely need you, on combat roles. You do a lot of command communication type flying things. So he comes back, and waits his few 5-6 days, and you get back on flight duty. And one of his first missions is to go down south, fly to 2, support some operation down near Da Nang. They flew almost all day, good 7-8 hours anyway. And it was nearing dusk when they were ready to head back home. And John was flying wing on whoever was lead. And they take off from Marble Mountain, and the process was to fly out over Da Nang Bay, keeping relatively low, a few hundred feet, to stay below the flight patterns for the incoming fighters and that stuff into Da Nang, and then turn out to sea or climb over High Van Pass, and probably at night they were going to turn out to sea and follow the coast up to Phubai. And they hit an unusual weather pattern. It was fog, or clouds and fog, from ground level to who knows how high. The lead aircraft plunges into it because it's black out at night and they don't see that from any distance, and suddenly they realize it's really bad and we're going to have to fly total instruments, so we better turn, get back out in the clear, call for a IFR flight up to Phubai, and shoot an approach up there. So the lead plane says, I'm going to make this is a standard naval turn, 20-degree angle bank, nice, easy to follow, and come out of it because they've just gone into it, and we'll form up and fly IFR. He starts his turn, and that's all they ever hear of John and his flight. John's flight consisted of a co-pilot who was only a second lieutenant, so he was real new over there. He had 4 kids. He was older than most second lieutenants. The crew chief was a guy on like his 2nd or 3rd tour. He kept volunteering to be, and he was a darn good crew chief. And the gunner was a new gunner, actually was a very senior NCO, who had flown in World War II, Korean War, and wanted to get 20 missions in Vietnam so he could complete the cycle, and then when he retired he'd have it all. So he flew guns. They found the plane at the bottom of Da Nang Bay within a day or so. The crew chief popped up out of the wreckage, and what pops up next to him, what should have been on him but wasn't, was a life preserver. He puts it on, floats for like 16 hours when he's located by searchers, and he's fine. The pilot and the co-pilot, the seat belts were off, the emergency hatches were open.
As if they'd gotten out then.
As if they'd gotten out, but one of them was found shot, as was the gunner, I think, and one was never found. So some Viet Cong boat out there or something found a couple of them and executed them. Who knows? But why the crew chief never heard or saw anything. He was fine and commenced flying again after a short recess. But we lost John, a very popular person. And
I think his name was Trombo.
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 Prombo. Prombo.
Okay.
Anyway, so that was another loss. We lost some more that summer, but I think our squadron for the 3 years over there had lost maybe 50 pilots, something like that, or crew members, I should say that, not just pilots, crew members.
Crew chief and gunners.
Yeah,
everybody.
Yeah, the 4. So anyway, our summer on the boat was a little more pleasant living standards. I mean, we had very good Navy food. Went through a monsoon on the ship, quite an experience. And landing at night on an LPH is, while not nearly as dangerous as flying a jet onto one, still presents itself with some highly hazardous flying, and was quite interesting. But it was nice living conditions. And as we progressed through the summer, of course there were more action, but one stands out was when I got short towards the end. Short is a term that we all used about your length of service over there. The last 30 days, as I mentioned earlier, you didn't fly as many combat missions if they didn't absolutely need you. And I was within, I want to say 3 weeks, 2 weeks of being ready to rotate back, so it was late September, it had to be. and middle to late. And I'm assigned what called CNC. I think it stood for Command Communications, but I don't know. They have another name. And I was flying a bird colonel from position to position that he commanded, and they were along a ridge line down in a valley that extended from Hoi An out to the sea. It was in the papers that week for heavy action in which some Army units refused to go into combat and pulled the weapons on their officers. Remember, that was in Stars and Stripes. It was a big stink.
Mm-hmm.
It hadn't happened that often, and so it was a big thing. And the Marines, towards the western end of the valley, nearer the sea, were engaged. But I'm just flying from one little spot to another. He'd get off and we'd circle for 30 minutes and then we'd pick him up and then we'd go to the next one. When all of a sudden, there's all kinds of calls coming out about had pulled back at least 2 companies, maybe more. Maybe it was a regiment size. They were pulled back to a road that ran down the center of the valley. And the valley was made up of vast numbers of rice paddies, basically. And on either side, the valley went up into trees, and there were some little pockets of woods or forest-like. And a Marine platoon had been cut off across the valley near one of the ridge lines and had taken several KIAs. And they couldn't pull back because they didn't have the personnel to bring our dead and wounded with us. And they weren't going to leave them. And 2 46 Deltas had tried to come in and lift them out, and they were both burning in the valley. Their crew had gotten, as we understood, together, 8 guys, somewhere along a riverbank that ran through there, and they were hiding in the grasses. I know at over 1,500 feet, while I circled up there, I took clusters of tracer fire, probably from like a 50 caliber, at 2,000 feet. They went right under my chin. I put the colonel into his position on the road by a maneuver that to this day he's probably still cussing me, because I fell at 70 degrees nose low, no, 70 degrees angle of bank, about 50 degrees nose low, and spiraled down to where I pulled rivets in the fuselage and pulled every ounce of power in the collective clear to the stop when my main mounts hit at a full run. And I didn't shove the struts up into the or anything. It just came to a stop. Foot either way, things would have been real rocky. And he jumped out, and I'm sure he was glad to be out because we felt like a rock. And I climbed out and then was told we have to try to get these out. So I didn't have the power to come down in a spiral like I'm certain the Deltas had tried to do and had gotten shot down. So obviously there was some heavy weaponry over there. And so I came down and right over that position on the road and then shot across that valley. And I know I reached, a red line on the chopper was 140 knots, which is I think roughly 170 something miles an hour. And I'm doing every bit of that. I'm hitting the red line and I'm 3 foot off the ground. We had grass in the main mounts when we got back, and twigs and all kinds of stuff. And now I'm coming across, and I'd had them pop a smoke, and 4 others popped, all up and down that valley. So they were on our radios. And my co-pilot is supposed to be keeping an eye on that as well as me, but I'm looking at other things too. And he starts yelling, "I've lost it, I've lost it." And I said, "I think I got it." And hopefully it was the right one. and there was a line of trees that to me resembled poplar trees, tall and narrow. And the smoke was from behind them. Well, I'm, like I say, 3 foot off the ground and going 170 miles an hour, and it's coming up fast. And there is a maneuver that 46 pilots developed over there. There was no way to really train for it without violating everything in the NATOPS manual. Boeing Vertol says it can't be done. Today's pilots say they don't know how to do it because we've talked to them, and there's camaraderie there. And it's called the button hook landing. And at full speed, the Alpha had one advantage. It had a manual switch that was called hover aft The Deltas didn't have that, the F models, the M models, whatever they are, none of them have had it since. Hover aft leveled the rotor head so that instead of having a slightly forward slant like that for forward speed, it was to give you a level platform more conducive to picking up sling loads. That automatically happens to some degree on the new birds. Still needed, but the manual did it manually, obviously, and it actually acted as an air brake. And you could be going, like I say, stress line speed, pull the nose up, hit the rudders, or the yaw pedals. I'm a fixed wing flyer too. Hit the yaw pedals, turn that thing almost sideways like that, and hit that hover aft. And those blades would program, and it was like a speed brake, just stopping you in the air while spinning you slightly. I pulled that up to jump over those trees. I yelled at the co-pilot, hover aft. He flipped that switch, and we stopped and dropped like a safe into that zone. Fortunately, there was no Marine sitting near that smoke. They were told not to be, and they weren't. And bango, we land right there with that smoke. And my crew chief jumps out, and he's helping the ground guys load KIAs on board. They put 12 on. That's a lot of weight. But we got to get them out of there, and nobody else is going in. And at that time, there's fire coming. The Marines are firing outbound from this, through the grass. Now we're the only ones setting up nice and high looking over it all. When, unbeknownst to me, two things happened. And one was that a flight of 2 Marine Cobras, which were new to the thing, they had only come in half a year before or so. A guy named Pennington was flying. He got killed later on, but Penny 1 and Penny 2, they call themselves. And they came in with full load of rockets and their machine guns. And there was a tree line, I want to, in my mind's eye, I want to say a couple hundred yards, maybe 300 yards in front of us where the fire was coming from, a lot of it. And they fired full loads of rockets together. Usually one followed the other, make a daisy chain out of it. They came in together and unloaded 72 rockets apiece into that tree line. And that whole forest jumped. It went up in the air in the concussion. Then, unbeknownst to me, because it was on another frequency, 2 Air Force F-4s with unexpended nape came in, and behind us dropped 2 canisters apiece. I was not a ground man. I didn't realize how much concussion napalm has. It knocked my crew chief down. The heat came up through the cabin, which is a small door that in my present poundage, I don't know that I would get easily through that door. It went up and only has 2 little windows to shoot out of. It came up and lifted my bullet bouncer off of my chest, which was velcroed on, and pushed it back into me, rocked the whole bird, and the heat was like a sun lamp close to your face. Just not very long, but flashed.
Flash.
And Tony yells, "Get out of here," my crew chief. And I pulled collective. We pop up in the air, probably, well, as high as the top of those trees, just a surge. But then I knew I couldn't maintain it. It was just to get over that tree, and then it starts going down. And boy, I've got every 100% power, everything going, and I bounced once on my main mounts, and then slowly, 15 miles an hour, 20, 35, 50, 100, I went back across that valley, and above us you could see tracers. I think what it was is I was so low and bouncing off that ground trying to get airspeed that they couldn't depress their muzzles far enough because of brush, rain, whatever.
Couldn't see you maybe?
Couldn't see me very well or at all. They could hear me. They knew where I was, but they couldn't see me, and they're shooting over me. And I went clear across that thing and pulled out. Now my wingman goes down, and he went after the crew in that river valley, and he finds them hiding in the mush and the muck, and the NVA started dropping mortars, the little pack mortars,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going into this thick mud and burping, burping up gallons of mud.
And that's
Now,
about
so-
all. No, no
Well,
shrapnel.
no shrapnel. It could have displaced the blades, I suppose, if a big enough blob hit them, but it didn't. They got back, and their whole bird was covered with patches of black mud, and their clothes. Again, the window is probably only 8-9 inches wide and maybe 2 feet high, and enough mud came in that their clothes were in mud, their whole instrument panels, you had to wipe all their gauges to be able to see. Everything was mud. And they got the crew out, both crews. And we were put in for the DFC, which, as I said later, got torn up because the squadron was disbanded. But it was an exciting time, exciting afternoon. And I'll tell you something, when you get back, everybody said, oh, there's only a couple guys I ever saw that never seemed to be just scared to death. I would get back and get my feet on solid ground. I'd feel fine. My mouth would be going a million miles an hour. As you can tell, I talk a lot. But you'd be pumped, and your knees would feel so weak they couldn't support you. But the rest of you felt fine. Knees just wobbly from the stress, the fear, the whatever. And everybody agreed that they were scared to death. Anybody that says that they didn't think they were scared, or the other guy wasn't scared, well, guys told me later they didn't think I was, because I seemed to love it so much. I was so scared. Now, I had given up God. Remember I told you that way back? I get out of the Marine Corps and I joined the FBI, as my friend Wally here was in for many, many years, 28 years. But my second assignment was down in Oklahoma. And through a series of events, we're talked into going to church again. Different church, but we kind of found a home there, and people started treating. But I still wasn't into this. I had, I came out, and boy, God didn't free my fear and all that. And I'm sitting in church one Sunday, and it hit me. If anybody talks about born again or what and stuff, I'm not an emotional person, and and I'm a believer strongly. Go to religious services all the time, but I couldn't say I don't emote about it, I guess. But it hit me so strong, it was like a voice just saying, you prayed for safety, for coming out alive, and I did it for you. You were blessed. And I look back at all the times when the bird behind me got hit, and I didn't. I landed in the zone, and I was fine, and the next guy, 155 round hit him. Smithereens. Mm-hmm. Why wasn't it me? God took care of me. And he just wanted me to shut up about it and believe. Because if you keep constantly praying and with fear, you're not believing. Mm-hmm. Children pray and they believe instantly because they've been told to.
But again, that happened when you were in the Bureau, after the Marine Corps.
Yeah, it was when I was in the FBI. And then I rejoined, and we've been involved in churches ever since, and find great solace in it. But it just showed my prayers were answered. I was taken care of. I was saved from things that, friends of mine, and one was hit by artillery. I remember flying along, seeing explosives going off below me, realizing suddenly they didn't hold up the artillery. I'm flying through an artillery barrage. One of my friends was hit by a 105 at altitude, blew them smithereens, because they were cleared and somebody screwed up.
So your prayers were answered, but
yeah,
you didn't realize it at the time.
Didn't realize it because I was too busy thinking whatever thoughts I was thinking. Mm-hmm. And so now the friends, I've got a list in a book around here of guys, you made them in flight school or in OCS and then flight school. And our wives were friends, our kids played together. And there's a list. We have, one of my friends wrote a lot of poetry. And it was kind of good, but it was about our time over there. And in front of his poetry book that was published, there's 20-some names on there. And we were all sitting in that auditorium that first day when they said, look to the right and look to the left. And the Army did the same thing. The Army helicopter pilots really took it. I've always been amazed there's never been a movie about helicopters. And yet, every Vietnam movie has to have the wop wop sound in it of helicopters. And yet, no one's ever told our story. And I think if anybody in history wanted to rectify it, that war was the helicopter war. That's, everything moved that way.
Yeah.
So anyway, got back. Well, and then in October of '69, I got home, joined my wife, who was staying with her parents in Lansing, Michigan, and unlike everybody else that was being transferred home at that time, I went to the West Coast instead of the East Coast. I went out and rejoined HMM 265, who had been disbanded at the very end of my tour over there. The Flag and Bible came home, and I rejoined, and we were a tactical squadron. Meaning that what we did, not train new pilots, but we supported like the Western White House. We flew the Marines down there to guard the Western White House when he was there. I flew the Secret Service, the President's baggage, some of his entourage occasionally. We flew the dignitaries from various industrial, military-industrial programs.
This was President Nixon at San Clemente,
Nixon,
right?
yeah, San Clemente, Western White House. And in fact, I have a cigarette lighter, a Zippo with the presidential seal on it, and Marine One. And while I was there, 4 of our guys, and previously there'd been several, who from that squadron moved to fly the president back in Washington. So it was kind of it's the way you got to HMX-1. It was one of the ways to go. And so we, I flew out there. Then in 1970, while I'm there, I look and my reserve commission is going to be up in early '71, and I was thinking, gosh, I better go regular and not just be a reserve officer. Should become a regular U.S. Marine Corps officer. But I wasn't sure that what was going to happen, and so I put in for that. But then somebody had mentioned the FBI and that they had thought about it. Then I thought, well, gosh, I'll just put another iron in the fire, although I realized the chances of getting in were very slim. They didn't hire much, and they had a lot of applicants. So I got my application in, and what should happen? But the Marine Corps comes back and says, sorry, try again next spring, your first application to stay, we'll try again. Then the Marine Corps said, anybody with a 3-year flight contract, and there were very few of us in the Marine Corps. Most had 4.5 years. I had a 3-year. You can get out 6 months early. And then President Nixon passes the 1970 Omnibus Crime Bill, and they said, hire 1,000 FBI agents. They called me back. I already had a clearance, of course, and all that. Called me back, said, do you want to go to the FBI? I said yes. The Marine Corps had said no. They started processing me, and in the unheard of time of 1 month, they had processed me, offered me a place in the FBI Academy. I put in my papers to get out. I had 2 weeks between the Marine Corps and reporting in again at Quantico, Virginia, where the FBI Academy was located, part of it was, and that's where I'd gone through Marine Corps OCS, again employed by the federal government, and it was the beginning of a 28-year career. Coming back from Vietnam, my son, who had been born only 3 months before I left, had to get used to his new daddy because I'd been gone so long, but it was quite an experience. He today has grown to be, he's now 40 years old, and he's a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. He was offered big bonuses and hiring by Microsoft Corporation out of the Air Force, and that's where he continues to work. My younger son, a graduate of Michigan State University as I am, and law school at University of Detroit Mercy.
That's Jonathan, is that right?
Jonathan Brand, yeah, and also a member of the Michigan Bar, is now in new agents training and will become an FBI agent at the age of 35 in July of this year. So maybe another brand to put in. I put in 28 years. Hopefully his career will be as rewarding as mine. My wife and I now live in Ludington, Michigan, a resort town, where we retired. We had a summer home here while I was still working, and chose it as our retirement area, and have another home here. I jokingly say now my summer house is 4 blocks west on the beach, and I still have, but it's wonderful here. We have reunions for my squadron. It has started about 4 years ago. We started having them every 2 years to be in between the reunions that started about 20 years ago of the overall Vietnam Marine helicopter pilots. That started as an organization for Marine helicopter pilots. Then it became at the protestation of all the what do you call it, the air crew, you know, the gunners and the crew chiefs, wanting to be part of the same. They flew with us too, and unlike the rest of the Marine Corps, there was a lot of fraternization between crew chief and pilot. We said, certainly you'll get in there. Then the corpsmen said, well, hey, a Navy corpsman, we're part of, you know, we were with you Marines all the time and flew on your birds every day. We need to have a place. And we said, welcome home. Then the Korean helicopter pilots, who always felt that they were forgotten, they've joined us. And now it is now called the Combat Helicopter Association, Marine Combat Helicopter, because we now have the youngsters in there from Iraq, from Kuwait, you know, from all the recent conflicts, even you know, some of the little things down in El Salvador and stuff like that, different expeditionary type things. We have helicopter pilots that flew anytime that there was combat, and they're a great inspiration. Before going in on the recent Iraqi war, squadron commanders called and asked for our advice about what to do in combat and all. They've greatly overhauled what they do. They don't go into nearly firefight situations anymore, but the terrain allows them to do that. So it's wonderful to still get together every couple years, sometimes every year if you go to reunions for both organizations, and we're closer than ever. 40 years later, just like going to see your brother. Guys have shown up for funerals from guys I haven't seen in 40 years, and I bet some of the retirees had funerals where some of the guys they worked with for 20 years weren't there. But their comrades will always show up, and we always do. And so, Semper Fi. I'm proud to be a Marine.
Well, Loren, thank you for talking with us today. We're interviewing Loren Brand, a Vietnam U.S. Marine Corps helicopter pilot. And again, this is part of the Veterans History Project being done under the auspices of Grand Valley State University History Department. I certainly appreciate your efforts today, Loren, and wish you Godspeed.
Yep, as Bob Hope says, thanks for the memories.